Okay, so this is part 3, Baibars, the Crusaders, Nemesis documentary. So, if you're keeping score, he is now the Sultan of Egypt. He's the man, basically.
Then in 1265, when the Sultan had gathered his Mamluk forces, he laid siege to the seemingly impenetrable coastal city of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Arsuf, which was defended by a pitiful force of some 250 Knight Hospitallers. But as the fortress was thought to be a masterpiece of military architecture, it was considered by Christians to be impregnable. But Baibars had other ideas. Noticing that the city's walls were constructed of soft coastal stone, the Egyptian Sultan deployed his largest siege engines, which fired hard limestone rocks at the porous walls of Arsuf, and finally, realizing that no help was coming, negotiations for the city's surrender began, in which Baibars offered the Hospitallers safe passage to Christian lands if they laid down their arms. But after they agreed, the Sultan went back on his word, and the Crusaders were taken into slavery in Egypt, where they were marched through the streets of Cairo with wooden crosses around their necks. Then, in order to...
Yeah, that's... I don't like when people do that. You go back on your word like that. I'm not a fan.
Then, in order to ensure that the fortress at Arsuf could never again be used as a foothold for future Christian crusades, Baibars ordered its total destruction. And so, one of the largest and most formidable castles in all of the Christian lands was erased from the map on Baibars' command, leaving the remaining Crusader strongholds now facing total oblivion from a merciless and relentless enemy. Although this policy of eradicating the Christians from the Holy Land was ruthless in the extreme, it is clear that all of Baibars' decisions were predicated on securing him total control over the Muslim Middle East, as, if he proved himself to be the Sultan who finally defeated the Mongols, as well as the Christians, he would be revered and praised by the entire Islamic population of the region, in turn making his position as Sultan effectively unassailable. Indeed, it would be easy to conclude that Baibars' reasons for sweeping the Christians into the sea were entirely due to his religious beliefs, but this could arguably be said to be ignoring the fact that he now controlled the Abbasid Caliph. Therefore, his motives were as much down to power and control as they were about defeating the infidel. It is also clear that the Sultan was an exceptionally gifted organizer and bureaucrat, as his armies were amongst the most well-provisioned and equipped of the period. And as well as this, the Sultan tied his territories together by instigating infrastructure projects, such as roads and bridges, including the Baibars Bridge in the Israeli town of Lod, that bears the Sultan's emblem of a rampaging lion with a rat under its claws, depicting the feeble enemies of Islam. The construction of these bridges and roads ensured speedy communication between population centres across Baibars' domains, which was facilitated by a courier service of riders, who would, in relay, carry important messages from town to town, ensuring that the Sultan and his commanders were kept up to date with the latest developments as soon as they arose, as this system meant that messages could be sent from Cairo to Damascus, and vice versa, in as little as 4 days. All in all, painting a picture of an extremely intelligent and capable Sultan, whose brain and eye for detail and logistics were the key to his grip on power.
Was that a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of his brain and eye? Because the other eye has a cataract in it? That's how I took it. Haha. Funny.
Although we may think of Baibars as a militaristic sultan, there is a great amount of evidence to suggest that he was respected across Europe and the wider world, as he enjoyed cordial relations with the Byzantine Empire and forged agreements with the Mongols of the Golden Horde for more Turkish slaves to be sent south to bolster his armies, and there is even evidence of him having treaties with the kings of Sicily, Aragon, and Castile, whom he exchanged gifts with, And in addition to his diplomatic achievements, Baibars also, in his capital of Cairo, built a mosque which still bears his name, and was also the first ruler of Egypt to appoint chief justices, representing the 4 main schools of Islamic law.
Wow.
It is also said of the Sultan that he was not just a formidable warrior, he was also fond of hunting, polo, jousting and archery, and was also a devout Muslim who saw to it that his subjects obeyed the letter of the Quran, as in 1271 he prohibited the consumption of wine throughout all of his territories, and whilst in Cairo he continued the Islamic tradition, inspired by the Prophet's love of cats, by constructing a garden for them within the city, designed to provide them with care, and this tradition of having cats as pets within Cairo still persists to this very day. Over the coming years, Baibars continued to lay siege to the isolated Crusader strongholds, one after another, including Atlit and Haifa and Safed in 1266, bringing the Kingdom of Jerusalem to the very brink of defeat, and then in May of 1268, the Sultan's Mamluk army finally arrived at the gates of the largest remaining Christian city of Antioch, that had nearly 200 years before been one of the first cities to be conquered by the Crusaders, but now its fall would mark the end of the European dream of securing the Holy Land. The Christians had initially captured Antioch after an 8-month-long siege from October 1097 to June 1098, but in contrast, it would take Baibars and his Mamluk army a single day to take the fortress city, pouring through a breach in its weakly defended walls, after which they embarked on what can only be described as total slaughter, as on the Sultan's orders, all the town's defenders were put to death, their women and children were sold into servitude, the Christian churches were burnt, and the leaves from their Bibles were thrown to the wind. According to 18th century scholars, the total number of Christians killed in the sacking of Antioch may have been as high as 18,000, with another 100,000 being sold into slavery. However, whatever the number was, many claimed that the mass killings at Antioch were the largest of the entire Crusader era, and were meant to, once and for all, eliminate the Christians altogether from the Kingdom of Heaven. These victories effectively marked the beginning of the end of the Crusader states in the Holy Land, and even though the final defeat of the Christians did not occur during Baibars' reign, it is certain that the eventual victory of the Muslims would not have occurred without Baibars, who, in 1268, then as previously mentioned, sought to foster better relations with the Mongol Golden Horde to the north, who now ruled his former homelands in the Russian steppes. The reason for the Sultan attempting to foster better relations with the northern Mongols was due to the fact that after the death of Mongke Khan in 1259, the Mongol Empire had been ruled over by his successor, Kublai Khan, whose rule saw the Mongol territories reach their colossal greatest extent, encompassing virtually all of modern-day China to the east to the borders of Hungary to the west. However, during his reign, Kublai, more and more, took the mantle of a Chinese emperor rather than a Mongol Khan, meaning that as the 13th century progressed, the Mongol territories began to fragment under regional leaders, including the Golden Horde, that controlled the majority of modern-day southern Russia, as well as the Ilkhanate Mongols, who controlled the southwest Persian territories of the empire, whose rulers were descendants of Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu, who died in 1265, leaving this portion of the empire to his son, Abaka Khan. It was this fragmentation of the Mongol Empire that prompted Baibars in 1268 to send emissaries to the new Khan of the Golden Horde, Mengu Timur, and in particular his general, Nokai, who was a Muslim. And although these diplomatic endeavours did not result in any concrete assistance against the Sultan's Ilkhanate Mongol rivals in Persia, it is likely that the warm relations that Baibars enjoyed with the Golden Horde may have prevented them from going to war against the Muslims in the years to come, in turn enabling Baibars to concentrate his efforts on the Persian Mongols and the Crusader states. From 1271, the...
Sorry, air kicked on. Kick it off right now. Okay, let's get past the commercial. I don't care. All right.
From 1271, the Egyptian Sultan renewed his attacks on the remaining Crusader strongholds, which were now held by the elite Christian fighting orders of the Knights Templars and the Knights Hospitallers. Although as powerful and rich as these orders were, their state-of-the-art castles were no match for the well-oiled Mamluk fighting machine, resulting in the Christian strongholds falling one after the other, such as the Templar castle of Crac des Chevaliers, which was assaulted by Baibars' army in March 1271, surrendering a month later. However, this time the Sultan spared the Christian defenders' lives, and as the fortress commanded a strategically important position in Syria, Baibars allowed it to stand, as he felt it would be an effective bulwark against further Mongol invasions. Despite these Muslim successes, the siege of Antioch and its subsequent fall had understandably sent a shockwave across Christian Europe, resulting in the so-called Lord Edward's Crusade, or Ninth Crusade, which had initially been formed by Edward, Prince of Wales, son of King Henry III of England, in support of Louis IX of France, who had led the failed Seventh Crusade in Egypt and been defeated by Baibars at Mansoura. However, after leaving Europe, the French king died of dysentery in August.
Longshanks, wasn't he the one who went after William Wallace? Was that the same one? Went after him and had him killed, quartered? You know, freedom! Yeah, Braveheart, the movie. Not Mel Gibson.
Of 1270 in modern-day Tunisia, putting an end to the Eighth Crusade and thusly forcing the English prince to continue to the Holy Land with a greatly weakened force. Upon arriving in the Holy Land, Edward formed an alliance with Baibars' arch-enemy, the leader of the Persian Ilkhanate, Abaka Khan, culminating in the Mongols and Christians mounting attacks against northern Syria, whilst in the meantime, Baibars, fearing a possible Christian landing in Egypt, had begun the construction of his own Mediterranean fleet, with which he led an attack against the island of Cyprus in 1271.
Did the Mongols ever before have a treaty where they teamed up with, as it said here, the Christians to attack someone? I would think under Genghis Khan, he's not doing that. He's just conquering people. So, but then again, it wasn't Genghis Khan. It was people who didn't have, I don't want to say the charisma, the personality, that's not it either. They didn't have that desire to conquer. Well, they might have, but they didn't have that ability to see it through like Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan, whatever, however you're supposed to say his name.
With the intention of severing Edward's supply lines in the Holy Land, but despite this, the Muslims, who had disguised their vessels as Christian ships, were defeated off the coast of Cyprus and forced to withdraw southwards. Despite this Muslim reversal, Edward now realised that the Christians simply did not have the strength to retake the Kingdom of Heaven from the Muslims, and as the Mongols had now retreated back into Persia, the Prince of Wales then began peace negotiations with Baibars, culminating in a 10-year, 10-month and 10-day treaty being signed in May of 1272 between the Christians and the Muslims. But when an assassination attempt was carried out on Edward in his bedchamber the following month, which may have been ordered by Baibars or a mysterious old man of the mountains who was the leader of an Islamic sect known as the Assassins, the Prince of Wales left the Holy Land in September of 1272, and whilst passing through Sicily, received news that his father Henry III had died, culminating upon his return to England in the prince being crowned King Edward I, or the man known to history as Edward Longshanks. After the end of the Ninth Crusade, Baibars turned his attention to expanding his borders once again, this time south of Egypt, in the Kingdom of Makuria, in modern-day southern Egypt on the borders with northern Sudan, effectively ending his hostilities with the Crusaders, as it would take the Egyptian Sultan another 4 years to bring the African kingdom under Mamluk control. In 1277, Baibars then once again turned his attention to his arch-enemies, the Ilkhanate Mongols, along with their Seljuk Turk vassals in the shape of the Sultanate of Rum, by invading southern Anatolia in the spring of 1277, when the Mamluks confronted the Mongols once again at the Battle of Elbistan on the 15th of April 1277. During the battle, the highly trained Mamluks were able to overwhelm their enemies, whose army consisted of thousands of irregulars, as well as ill-disciplined troops from the Mongols' Georgian and Seljuk vassals. However, during this battle, the Mamluk left wing had collapsed in the face of the Mongol right, and despite the fact that afterwards Baibars' armies advanced into Anatolia, the Sultan was far from jubilant, and at one point stated, "How can I rejoice? I had believed that if 10,000 horsemen of my army were to meet 30,000 Mongols, I would defeat them. But today I met 7,000 Mongols with all my army, and they aroused panic, and my men lost heart. Without Allah's grace, they would have defeated us." After marching into Syria and southern Turkey, word then reached the Egyptian Sultan that another Mongol army was also invading into Asia Minor, and as his supply lines were now stretched to the limit, Baibars decided to retreat back southwards and return to Damascus, having secured his northern borders against the Mongols, for the time being at least. And despite securing another famous victory against his enemies, little did the Sultan know that this campaign against the Mongols would in fact be his last. Despite being arguably the most powerful man in the Middle East, if not the world at this time, Baibars would eventually meet his end, not on the battlefield, but in mysterious circumstances. As whilst in Damascus on the 1st of July 1277, the Sultan drank a cup of poison, which is thought, by some, to have been intended for another, whilst others suggest that Baibars actually died of battle wounds. But whatever the real cause of his death, the Sultan was ultimately interred in a specially built mausoleum in the Al-Zahiriya Library in Damascus, where he remains to this very day. There are very few examples in the history of the world of people rising from the very bottom of a given country's social order or class system to become one of the most powerful human beings on the planet during their lifetime. The fourth Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, Baibars, is one such person, as at the start of his life, he was a member of a tribe in the Russian steppes, and after fleeing the Mongol invasion, was eventually sold into slavery in Egypt, where he, through Spartan-like training, eventually became one of the Egyptian Sultanate's greatest generals, and ultimately one of its greatest sultans.
It really is like a Spartan. Why is the name completely? I think they just said it. Oh my goodness.
Leading the vanguard at the Battle of Ain Jalut, which is regarded by many as being one of the most important battles of the Middle Ages, Baibars and his Mamluk comrades proved that the Mongols were not invincible, and in defeating them, saved the entire Muslim Middle East from total annihilation and subjugation. After this, Baibars formed one of the most powerful Islamic empires the world has ever seen, which he held together with state-of-the-art infrastructure and an incredibly powerful military that, during his reign, continued to reclaim the Holy Land from the Christians, but also prevented the Mongols from ever again invading the Middle East. In the decades after his death, Baibars...
Spartacus. I've been sitting here thinking, what was it? What was the name that I was trying to think of? Spartacus. Yeah, that's kind of like his rise. Except I'd say he did much more than Spartacus, because Spartacus dies before he, is able to achieve all of this.
As Mamluk successors continued to retake the Christian strongholds until finally the coastal city of Acre fell on the 18th of May 1291, effectively ending the permanent Crusader presence in the Middle East, and along with it, the era of the Crusades. What do you think of Baibars? Was he a brutal slave soldier who forged a tyrannical, militaristic empire across the Middle East that murdered thousands of civilians? Or was he one of Islam's greatest heroes, who united the children of the Prophet under his banner and saved them from the Mongols, as well as the Crusaders, whom he brought to the very brink of defeat?
I'd say both can be true, and his actions, what he did, which I disagree with that one thing of him selling the one people into slavery after telling them that they would get free passage But how many times when he was growing up did he see that same kind of thing happen, where people put down their weapons and then were taken and, you know, and sold as he was? So the things that he did are kind of a reflection of things that happened to him or that he saw. So it's normal. So even though I could say, I don't like you doing that, if that's what you know, and if that's accepted in a way, because if you're told, look, you put down your arms and you'll have safe passage to go home, you have to understand it could be a lie. You could be executed when you go out, you know. So I don't like it, but if I'm in that situation and I've grown up knowing that this is what happens, and maybe in a way it happened to me, then it's an acceptable process of life that I could do it to someone else. Much like a slave who becomes free gets property, and what do? They get people who are going to be slaves for them to do exactly what they saw growing up, because that it may not have been correct or right. It's all they know. So when they ascend to a position of power, they relate to what they saw before, which is the oppression of other people. So that's power to them. So they do the same thing. And it's it's easy for me to sit here and go, well, you know, but I didn't live in that time. I didn't go through those things. We vastly different upbringings and different times and what's acceptable and what isn't. So everything that he went through that I'm saying, you shouldn't have done that, he could say, look at my history. I went through that. What am I supposed to say to that? Yeah, but I don't like it. So when you go through it, then you can be different. But if I'm going through that same thing, what's to say I'm different? I could be doing the exact same thing he did, and then I would be looking at some other YouTuber and saying, what do you know about it? Just shut up. So I just yelled at myself, I think. Excuse me. Okay. Well, now we know him a little bit better. Well, I know him. You already know him. I know him a little bit better. I mean, I can't. He seems to have been a powerful guy. So, okay, I'm done coughing now. So I'm going to end this here, because the video's over. You know, it is what it is. So like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more of this raunchy content. You know, what the hell's going on? Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to end this here. And until the next video, which will be tomorrow, unless this is Friday, then it'll be Monday. You have a good day, have a good night. Find the button, and here it is.